Alright, today we're looking at lesson 6-4 on page 150, decimal forms of fractions and mixed numbers. Oops, hold on a second here. So, looking at the picture here, it says, how can you write fractions as decimals? Now we've done this, but now we're going to talk about mixed numbers also. So it says recall or remember that a fraction can represent division of the numerator by the denominator. And they want you to write 3/8 and then also 2 and 5/11 as decimals. And they show you on this number line here where 3/8 would fall. And then, of course, here's one whole, oops, right there, 2 whole, and then where 2 and 5/11 would fall. Let's look at the next page. Okay, so on 151, we talk about here dividing to write 3/8 as a decimal. Remember, we can divide the numerator 3 by the denominator 8. So they set up the division problem here. And make sure, notice they put the decimal after 3 because we're making a decimal and bring it up. Very important. You want to make sure that you have the decimal placed correctly because that's what this is all about. Making a fraction into an equivalent decimal. And they do the math. 8 goes into 30 3 times, which would give you your 24. And you can work it out. They don't show the math here, but they get the answer 0.375 or 375 thousandths. So the decimal 375 thousandths is what they call a terminating decimal. So you want to pause and write this definition down. And the reason it's a terminating, think of if you terminate somebody, you end their job or basically fire them, or it ends. So it's called a terminating decimal because the digits in the quotient, remember the quotient is the answer of a division problem, end, and there's no remainder. So it just ends with no remainder, and so the whole division problem ends or terminates. Alright, let's look over at 2 and 5/11. Alright, so now we need to find the decimal equivalent of 2 and 5/11. So they want you to think of 2, the whole portion, separately. We know that when we write our decimal, 2 is going to be on the left side or the whole side of the decimal. So it's going to be 2 and something. And the something or the decimal portion is my fraction. So again, you can divide the numerator by the denominator to find the decimal portion here that fills in that spot. And they do the math here. So again, it's 5 in the box divided by 11 outside of the box. They put their decimal there after the 5 and bring it up, and then you can see how they work it out. Now notice, once they get to the second 5, things start repeating, and they're left with a remainder of 5, and they add a 0. And then they're left with a remainder of 6, they add a 0, and then they're left with a remainder of 5, and if they'd add a 0, this pattern would continue. So the decimal 0.4545, and notice it's all these dots, is what they call, again, here's another term for you to write the definition of, is called a repeating decimal. So because the digits in the quotient, the answer, repeat. So you write a bar over the repeating digits. So the numbers that repeat in this case are the 4 and the 5. So you put a bar over the 4 and the 5. So 2 and 5/11, here we go, is equal to the decimal 2.454545, which would continue and continue and continue. So we would write it as 2 point, with your decimal there, 45 with that bar above those two numbers that repeat. So 2.4, oops, not 2, 2.45. I only have one decimal and decimal. Alright, so remember, we have our whole number to the left of the decimal. Do your division if you need to find the decimal portion of the answer. Now remember, sometimes we can take a fraction like 1/5. And if I had 2 and 1/5 and I wanted to write the decimal portion, I could change, it would be 2 and something, but I could change that 1/5 to an equivalent fraction in tenths, and I would know how to write that. So 5 times 2 is 10, so 1 times 2 would be 10. So I could write oops, 2/10. I don't know what happened there. All right, let's look back at page 150. All right, on another example on 150, it says, how can you write decimals as fractions or mixed numbers? And it might be a little easier for you to move from a decimal to a fraction. So it says here, convert decimals to fractions by writing the decimal as a fraction with a denominator of tenths, hundredths, or thousandths, and then write the fraction in simplest form. Use a similar approach to convert a decimal greater than 1 to a mixed number. All right, so let's look at this. So they want you to write 28 hundredths as a fraction. All right, so like we say this, 28 hundredths, well, 0.28, 28 hundredths would be written as 28 over 100. And we always, always, always simplify. So here they divide by basically here, this should be a division sign, 4 over 4. And 28 divided by 4 would give you the 7. 100 divided by 4 would give you 25. So my answer would be down here, 28 hundredths equals 7 over 25. Let's look at another example here. Okay, so let's look at a mixed number. They have 4.125 as a decimal. We want to write it as a mixed number. So separate your whole from your fraction or your decimal portion. So we know our whole number is 4, and so we don't really need to worry about that too much. But we want to write this 0.125 or 125 thousandths as a fraction. So here we have 4 and 125 thousandths. Here's my 4, and here is 125 over 1,000, which I could write like this. Now I can't leave this as 125 over 1,000. Of course I have to simplify. So what you can do is divide by, in this case, 125, or maybe you choose to divide by 25 and then divide by 5. But when you would then simplify and you would get 4 and 1/8. So 4.125 is equal to 4 and 1/8. Okay, look back on page 151 of the guided practice. Try number 1 and number 4. Number 1, and then pause me. Number 1 is write each decimal as a fraction or a mixed number in simplest form always. I'm going to do that, so go ahead and pause me and then see if you got it right. So if I looked at number 1, I would say this number as 8/10. So I would start with writing 8/10. And I know that I can't leave it as 8/10 because it's not in simplest form. So then I would divide by 2 over 2, and I would get 4/5. So this would be my answer. 8/10 is equal to 4/5. Now, we can see that right here. Now let's look at number 4. Now, number 4, 5, and 6 want you to write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal. Now this is already in tenths, so 7/10 helps me tremendously. I can write 7/10 by putting the 7 in the tenths place of a decimal. So 0.7 would be how I would write the equivalent decimal to 7/10. What I'd like you to do is try and do number 2 and 3. Remember, this is going from a decimal to a fraction. We have our whole number, then our fractional portion. Our fractional portion. And then do number 5 and 6, which is changing fraction to a decimal. You will probably divide on these, both of these. So you have your whole number. You'll have to divide 5 by 8 to get your decimal portion, and then put it together. Same for number 6. You have your whole number 4 and point. You'll find your do your division problem, 5 divided by 9, to get the decimal portion also. Bring it to class tomorrow, and don't forget to bring a question. See you then.